President Trump and Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, have just announced the formation of a Second Amendment task force within the United States Department of Justice. I do not think it's a coincidence that what just occurred before this announcement, that would be the confirmation of new Solicitor General John Sauer and the head of the Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Justice, Harmeet Dillon. Let's talk about what all this means. And most importantly, I want to address a question that keeps popping up. Why is Donald Trump and Pam Bondi supposedly moving so slow on the Second Amendment? I think there's a strategy here, and I think it's a good one. Let's break it down. Hey folks, it's Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Down, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. I appreciate your support. All right, so this is important. A lot of people are raising questions about, it seems like Pam Bondi and Donald Trump for some reason don't seem to like the Second Amendment because they're moving so slow. Well, first of all, I reject the premise because I think they're moving really fast. We've covered this before. If you compare how the Trump administration is pushing the Second Amendment agenda versus, let's say, how George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush did not, or were super slow and only got accomplished a few things, the Trump administration with Pam Bondi is going super fast compared to that. But nevertheless, I want to sort of explain to you, I think, what the strategy is with the Trump administration on the Second Amendment. I think it's sort of being lost on people as to why they're not really moving slow. They're moving strategically. Specifically, they are doing something that President Trump is very good at, and Attorney General Pam Bondi is very good at, and that is using the media cycle to advance their agenda. Let me step back and explain, and then we're going to go down and I'm going to show you the facts as I see it, demonstrating my theory is correct, which is that Donald Trump is rolling out with Attorney General Pam Bondi the Second Amendment agenda every 5 to 7 days, making a new announcement on another Second Amendment initiative, because that keeps it in the media, keeps the successes highlighted, and makes it harder for the anti-gunners to gain any traction on any one thing. And at the end of this year, it's going to be a powerful, powerful antidote to a lot of these anti-gun laws. So let's start with the most basic principle of who is President Trump. Now, when I was a media surrogate for President Trump back in the 2016 election, for example, one of the questions I would frequently get in the media was something along the following lines. They'd say, hey, Mark, how does Donald Trump win this election when he has so little money in the bank compared to Hillary Clinton? Just to give you an example. And the answer to me was obvious, but it wasn't obvious to a lot of people, and that's this. Donald Trump understands something far more valuable than advertising dollars. Specifically, Donald Trump and his team understands the value of what's known as earned media. Now, earned media may be something a lot of you are not familiar with, so I'm going to explain it to you. There's different ways to communicate a message, to advertise a product, to advertise a service. The most basic way, historically, is sort of the common sense way everyone flags, is advertising. You go over to the local newspaper, you go to the local TV station, whatever it is, and you give someone money, and they run an advertisement saying, hey, buy my soda. Hey, vote for my candidate. Hey, buy my shirts, whatever it is. Okay? Classic advertisements. But there's something far more effective in the media that President Trump and Donald Trump knows well. And that is what's known as earned media. Far more effective, far more persuasive, far more valuable than advertising dollars. And what is earned media? Earned media is when someone else writes about you. What do I mean by that? If a newspaper writes a story about Mark Smith and his law firm, for example, that is going to be more credible with a reader than if Mark Smith and his law firm takes out an advertisement that says, give Mark Smith and his law firm money because we're like good lawyers. You see what I'm saying? Advertising does have value, brings attention to your service, to your product, whatever it is. So there's value to it. But earned media is far more valuable because people write an article saying, Mark Smith is the best lawyer, his law firm is the best law firm. And it's a whole article about my accomplishments. People read that article and they give it more credibility because it's a news story about Mark Smith and his law firm, let's say. Or in the case of Donald Trump can take out advertising and spend money advertising about Donald Trump and his campaign. But it was always far more valuable for President Trump to be written about, talked about, televised, whatever it was. That was known as earned media. And Donald Trump did all these interviews and did all this stuff, including generating news stories about himself and his campaign, because that earned media was, number one, free because he didn't have to pay for it. It's a story about him, so he's getting in the press about what he's doing, and A, he doesn't have to pay for it, unlike advertising, you have to pay for it, and B, it's considered far more credible because people watch the news stories and they pay attention to them and give it more credibility in many respects. So that's why I always explained back in 2016 as a media surrogate for President Trump that the reality was he had so much earned media going for him that he did not need to have an advertising budget as big as Hillary Clinton did. So obviously it sort of worked out. Now, I want to mention this in the context of the Second Amendment and the rollout of the Second Amendment agenda of President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi, which I explained to you is going to be fantastic. I think the ball's already gotten rolling. He's done more for the Second Amendment already than most Republican presidents have even considered doing, and it's just getting going. But I pointed out to you that I thought that the real reform, the real effect, the real benefit to the Trump administration when it comes to our Second Amendment rights is really going to get rocking and rolling after the confirmation by the United States Senate of Solicitor General John Sauer and the head of the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Justice, Harmeet Dillon. Because I explained to you that those two positions, in terms of the blocking and tackling, the day-to-day hammering away in favor of our Second Amendment rights, we needed a Solicitor General, we needed the head of the Office of Civil Rights. And that was just filled in the last several days because the U.S. Senate did not get around to it until the last few days. But now they've been confirmed. And on the heels of that, we now have an announcement that the Department of Justice internally is creating a Second Amendment task force. I think that's very good news. But the reason why I sort of want to put this into context is of the earned media and how Donald Trump, I think, intends to roll out this Second Amendment agenda drop by drop, drip by drip, week by week, is because he wants to keep it in the news. He wants to keep the highlights in the Second Amendment every week. Every 5 to 10 days, I think there's going to be another good thing associated with the Second Amendment, which I think is far more effective, frankly, than announcing like 20 initiatives on Monday. And by the time you get to Friday, the newspapers and the print cycle and the internet and the bloggers are going to stop writing about it. So I think it's far more effective strategically in terms of rolling out his agenda if they announce a Second Amendment related movement or Second Amendment advancement, if you will, every 5 to 10 days or so. And I think if you look at the timeline that I'm going to give you right here and right now, that seems to be exactly what President Trump's team and Attorney General Pam Bondi's team is doing. And I think it makes strategic sense because it keeps, among other things, the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms in the press every week or so, which I think is good for us because it makes sure that the Overton window of what is an acceptable possibility of different things, it keeps it alive and well when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms. And let's just run through kind of what the Trump agenda has done so far for the Second Amendment. And I want you to note the timeline here because I think it really illustrates my observation that every 5 to 10 days, I think there's going to be another positive announcement involving the Second Amendment and positive developments. So first of all, let's just go back all the way back to November after the election. In November 2024, President Trump announces the great John Sauer to be the Solicitor General. He's defended the Second Amendment repeatedly when he was the Solicitor General out there in Missouri. Very good stuff. I think he actually even defended that Missouri was basically a anti-federal gun control law state. So very good stuff out there. That was kind of the Second Amendment Nullification Act out there in Missouri. So John Sauer, very good on the Second Amendment. That was announced in November. Then you have in December, Harmeet Dillon, who has represented Second Amendment plaintiffs through her law firm, I believe, very outspoken in favor of the right to keep and bear arms. Harmeet Dillon, I knew her back in New York many years ago when she worked for a prominent law firm alongside me. We had separate law firms, but Harmeet Dillon has always impressed me. She's definitely a strong advocate and very good on all the issues, including the right to keep and bear arms. And again, in December, she's announced to be in charge of the Office of Civil Rights as the Assistant Attorney General. And this is a great addition, which, of course, has just been confirmed. Then we get to January. Donald Trump, of course, is sworn in And he immediately announces that they're going to start using ATF agents to, alongside the U.S. Marshal Service and the DEA, to sort of do immigration-related enforcement, which I always explain to you is very good, to keep those ATF law enforcement agents away from law-abiding gun owners or away from gun owners and trying to enforce sort of malum prohibitum, BS, nonviolent, victimless crimes, which I think are all crazy, and that's basically all federal gun control law is. They're malum prohibitum, non-evil, non-morality, just arbitrary, line drawing by legislators, like what is the length of a barrel. There's nothing immoral or moral or just or unjust about the length of a barrel. It's just arbitrarily drawn by our legislators. And of course, these are malum prohibitum, victimless crimes if you have the wrong length barrel in your closet, but you get to go to prison for it if you have the wrong one. And it's good to see the ATF agents are not harassing people like they once were under Joe Biden. Then we get to February. On February 7th, we have the enactment, we have the signature and the publication of the executive order by President Trump called Protecting the Second Amendment Rights, in which he ordered the Attorney General Pam Bondi to examine all orders and all federal laws as to whether or not they interfere with the Second Amendment rights. That was announced on February 7th. Just a week or so later, Attorney General Pam Bondi fires Pamela Hicks, the chief counsel at the ATF, in kind of a very public way. I believe she's even escorted out of the building, according to the news reports that I saw. And she, of course, was actively involved in advancing the Joe Biden anti-gun agenda. That occurred in late February 2025. And at the same time, Kash Patel is confirmed as the FBI director, and then it is immediately announced as a positive development for the Second Amendment, which I agree it is, that Kash Patel, who has prominently spoken at big events, including for events at the Gun Owners of America, which, of course, I've also spoke at the same event at last August 2024 alongside Kash Patel, big supporter of Kash Patel and, of course, Gun Owners of America. But in February, at the same time, not only is Kash Patel confirmed as the FBI director, he is then announced to be the acting director of the ATF, something that was unprecedented, but again, a major announcement and a major action. Always important to have these Second Amendment supporters in these positions of authority in the Department of Justice, and that was a big event at the end of February. But then, about 10 or 11 days later, sort of early to mid March 14th or so, we have that continuing resolution that's enacted by Congress that basically allows the Department of Justice to reallocate resources away from the ATF as they deem appropriate. That was not really allowed prior to the passage of that budget by Donald Trump on March 14, 2025. And this is a big deal because that budget that was enacted did not specify any specific amount of money to go directly to the ATF or its efforts. And then just a few days after that announcement, consistent with the ability to pull resources and of responsibilities away from the ATF under that budget bill that was enacted by Congress and signed into law by President Trump, we have on March 19, 2025, like I said, 5 or 6 days after that budget was enacted, we have Attorney General Pam Bondi releases that new interim final rule withdrawing the Attorney General's delegation of authority to the ATF dealing with the restoration of Second Amendment rights. As you probably recall, there's a federal statute, 18 U.S.C. 925C, that specifically allows for the Department of Justice to restore American Second Amendment rights, so they're no longer prohibited people under 18 U.S.C. 922G. There's a bunch of ways this is done, but since really the early 1990s, as I've talked about before, there was a sort of a budget agreement between the Democrats that hate guns and hate gun owners and the Democrats that are law and order, I should say, and the Republicans that were law and order Republicans who didn't like criminals with guns. And they were sort of a bipartisan agreement that even though 18 U.S.C. 925C allows for the restoration of Second Amendment rights under federal law, they were going to deprive, listen carefully, they were going to deprive the ATF of the money necessary to do that job, which is why when that budget was passed in March by Trump and signed into law by Trump and allowing the movement of money from ATF to other parts of DOJ, this allows the other aspects of DOJ to restore Second Amendment rights that previously had been forbidden because they denied the ATF the money to do so. And up until that moment, the ATF was the only agency within the Department of Justice who could restore your rights. But Attorney General Pam Bondi has not only pulled that authority away from the ATF with her resolution, with her new rule, at the same time, the money is now being pulled away from ATF, which means someone else at DOJ will be able to restore rights. And of course, that's exactly what happened with Mel Gibson, which we'll get to in just a moment. And then we have at the end of March, just again, a couple of days thereafter, the Department of Justice filed a brief asking the court in the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit to basically put on pause a decision whether or not to hear that case dealing with United States versus Peterson en banc. That's the case involving the prior ruling under the Biden administration argued to the Fifth Circuit and a conclusion by a 3-judge panel in the Fifth Circuit that said that suppressors are not arms under the text of the Second Amendment's right of the people to keep and bear arms. This was clearly fatally flawed in terms of the analysis 6 ways to Sunday. I've even pointed this out in no less a publication than Bloomberg Law. That's right, Bloomberg Law. How funny is that, right? Yes, a major article in Bloomberg Law got a lot of attention, pointed out that the Trump administration had to get this right and had to fix this in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. And on March 20th, the Department of Justice, probably at the direction of Attorney General Pam Bondi, specifically filed a document with the Fifth Circuit that says, please pause, don't decide whether or not you're going to hear this case en banc. We're going to decide what our position is going to be because hint, hint, we're likely going to change it and probably take the position that suppressors are indeed arms under the text of the Second Amendment. And then shortly thereafter, just a couple days thereafter, you notice how every time there's one of these events, there's a big, flurry in the YouTube community. There's a big discussion in the news. There's a lot of talk on social media. So every one of these events allows the Second Amendment to be talked about by millions of people. And that is exactly consistent with Donald Trump's approach that rather than take out advertising, broadcasting something good about himself or his administration, it's better to do these activities, these events, once a week or so and generate earned media, meaning the press writes about these things free of charge and broadcast the agenda out and loud and proudly. And then we have, after this, the Peterson brief by the Department of Justice saying pause on the suppressor question. We're going to get back to you. We have the announcement that law professor Rob Leiter is the new chief counsel at the ATF. Rob Leiter is known as a proponent of the Second Amendment. He's written many articles in favor of the right to keep and bear arms. And obviously this is a positive development at ATF. And then a mere 10 days later, notice how we're every 7 to 10 days, there's like another Second Amendment announcement out of the administration. I don't think that's a bug. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's part of a strategy, a PR strategy, a marketing strategy to advance our right to keep and bear arms. In addition to the fact they're actually doing something which is really, really good. So then we get to early April. Just a few weeks ago, we have the announcement that the Department of Justice has restored the gun rights, the Second Amendment rights of actor Mel Gibson, as well as maybe, some order of magnitude, another 9 or 10 people. And this is great. They had their Second Amendment rights restored. Big news. Now a lot of people at that time says, oh, come on, Mark. Why do we care that Mel Gibson and a handful of other people got their Second Amendment rights restored? Why not me, or why not my buddy down the street? And the answer is real simple, folks. Number one, you got to start somewhere, right? Someone gets to be first. Someone gets to be last. It's just the way it is. And if you set the precedent with giving back the Second Amendment rights of Mel Gibson, let's think about this for a moment. If your first tranche, your first group of people that get back their Second Amendment rights includes a prominent actor, a prominent person like Mel Gibson, do you think that gets the attention of the media? Oh, yes, it does. Going back to Donald Trump is a master of earned media, which is media that people write about him and write about others without paying for it, without advertising. So if you give 10 people their Second Amendment rights back, including Mel Gibson, everybody writes about it. It's in the press. It's in the New York Times. You're broadcasting. This is now going on. This is good strategic sense. And again, this is not saying that the Trump administration is not saying these are the only 10 people we're going to restore their rights for. It is pretty clear they're lining up a situation where they're going to restore a lot of people's Second Amendment rights. This is simply just the beginning. And by doing Mel Gibson first, it actually lets the Second Amendment community know this is going on, which allows other people to know about it and start to apply and start the process of getting ready to seek the restoration of one's rights by the Department of Justice as this plays out. Remember, Donald Trump has only been in office right now like 78 days. Okay, so, it's, a lot of this stuff is going in just literally the first 3 months, the first 100 days. We're not even at the 100-day mark, so there's a lot of good stuff going on. And then, of course, what happens just like 5 days after the announcement of Mel Gibson and the others getting their rights restored? We find out on April 7th, 2025, that the Department of Justice and the ATF has announced the repealing of the ATF's so-called zero tolerance policy as applied to FFL's federal firearms licensees, that basically says that if you have your FFL revoked, you lose your license, or it's revoked because of a paperwork error. That's bye-bye. That policy is now gonzo, and that is a great start, because that means that the FFLs, the gun stores, the gun dealers around this great country can do their job in the normal course without stressing out that Joe Biden is going to look for a way to yank their livelihood away from them under some nonsensical claim. And in addition to being good on the Second Amendment, we know that President Trump is very interested in expanding business, including small business, and a lot of gun companies and gun stores are small businesses that Donald Trump is trying to encourage to grow and to add employees and so on and so on. So it's win-win-win. And again, as you can see, every week or so, there's another major Second Amendment event that is getting a lot of attention as it's announced and then as it's done. And last but not least, just right now, right yesterday, just a couple days after that zero tolerance policy goes out the window, bye-bye Joe Biden's policy, the next thing you know, of course, is that we have this announcement of a Second Amendment task force within the Department of Justice, likely just announced because of the confirmation of John Sauer and Harmeet Dillon. That is a big deal. And last but not least, with all this stuff going on, we also know that the very first thing, or one of the first things that Donald Trump did as soon as he got into office, was to shut off the websites, shut off the web pages associated with that Joe Biden White House office of gun violence policy, or whatever that nonsense was. Again, another big win for the Second Amendment. So the bottom line is, I think the Trump administration is moving with speed on Second Amendment rights in all respects. I think it's going to continue to pick up the speed and accelerate. And the reason why I think it's not all being announced all at one time is strategic. I think there's a communication reason here to roll these things out every 5 to 7 to 10 days. I think it makes good sense, because again, part of winning for our Second Amendment rights is to not just win policy-wise, you also want to win in the field, in the space of public relations and marketing. You want the American people to support this, and by doing one thing at a time, where the Second Amendment community can come together and argue in favor and argue in defense of the Trump policy, I think that is a very good thing. And as you can see, the Trump administration is rolling out the Second Amendment agenda with one announcement every 5 to 10 days, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Tell me if you think I'm missing. Tell me if you think I'm too squishy into supporting Donald Trump. I don't think I am, but if you disagree, feel free to let me know, and I'll be happy to check it out. So there you have it, folks. Hope you learned something here today at the 4 Box of Honor. Hope you learned about earned media, what it means, and how it can be used by politicians, including Donald Trump. And again, make sure you follow me on X at 4 Box of Honor, and don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and Rumble. We're now over 210,000 subscribers. Thank you so much for your help. I can't believe that such a nerdy, geeky channel has gotten become so popular. And I hope I continue to do a good job to help educate Americans on our right to keep and bear arms and other things. So there you have it. I look forward to talking to you all again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.